Hey guys, I am back to do my Saturday morning makes and share some cards that I have made. Plus, at the end, I thought I would do a little tutorial and some tips and tricks when it comes to creating shrink charms. And I need to apologize now in case you hear any dogs barking or growling. My dogs are absolutely freaking out over the neighbor dog. So, on this first card, I made this using the the hot foil stamp from Waffle Flower. I shared it in my previous haul video, and that sentiment there is also from Waffle Flower in those sentiments that cuts out a bunch at once. This card was made using the elongated hexagon hot foil stamp from, again, Waffle Flower. And then I just used some butterfly paper that I had in my stash, and then some pre-cut and stenciled butterflies that I have in my little my batch book, I like to call it. It's just where I keep a lot of things that I've made so I can pull out and use it at any point. And then on the butterflies, I used some Hero Arts pearls and used them there in the middle of the butterflies. And then that sentiment you see there is from My Favorite Things, or MFT. On this card, I just took some stencils from the Greetery, a solid silhouette image from Paper Tray Ink, and then that sentiment there, in a zombie apocalypse, I would kill you last, is also from MFT in the same stamp set that you see on the butterfly card. And then this last card here is made using the 8 stencil set from the Greetery. I shared that in my previous haul. And then that sentiment there is from another stamp set that got released from the Greetery last month. So I thought I would share with you guys how I do my little charms or buttons using shrink paper. I got asked about it in a previous video. So I would say the number one thing is that you need to use StazOn. I am a big fan of VersaFine Clair, and I use it in everything else except for shrink charms. Because the paper, when you're using shrink paper, is very slick, StazOn just works better. It just sticks to the paper. You're going to have less smearing. I've just found that it works the best. Even though StazOn doesn't smear as much, it can still smear, especially if you're, just starting to figure this out and work with shrink paper. So I did want to share that if you do stamp an image and you don't like it, or it smears on you, you can use the StazOn stamp cleaner. Just spray a little bit on there or spray a little bit on your rag, wipe it down, and then you can restamp that image. So now you're not wasting that shrink paper. The shrink paper that I'm showing here in this video is actually a colored pack that I got off of Amazon. So I did want to show that another thing when you're doing shrink is to be mindful of the image that you're choosing, because if you're picking something that has a lot of openings, then it's going to, it can cause issues when you shrink it down. I would suggest using the most solid image you have, because you're not going to want to have these like warped openings that I'm showing you here on this little red cup, because it shrinks down so fast, and then it is very, very hot when it's done, and then it cools rapidly. It's almost impossible to get it to shape correctly before it hardens. And then once it hardens, there's not much you can do about it. So I would avoid using any image that has a lot of openings. And then these are some little baking tags that I made using a stamp set from Jaded Blossom. And it just says from the kitchen of Mrs. Claus. And I think the other one says Mrs. Claus Baking Company. I just used a 2-inch scalloped circle and punch those out. And then here I actually wanted to try and make my own buttons. So I used that Fiskars punch, punched 2 holes in it and shrunk it down. I was showing you the size difference between when it's not shrunk and when it is, because I make these little hand sewn baby shoes, and I wanted to try and maybe add my own button to it. So that's another idea if you want to start playing around with shrink paper. So another thing is just be mindful of how drastically this paper shrinks down. I knew that my heart stamps were going to shrink, but I didn't think they would come out that small. So that is just something, I learned trial and error. So I am going to show you how I make my charms. And so this is actually a stamp and die set that I got from Joann's. It is, I believe it's Hampton Arts. And you're going to want to use a die that's open instead of a solid piece of metal because it's easier to line up when you're die cutting. And again, that way you can put it, outside of that ink and try not to smear it even more. However, I do tend to stamp my image, set it aside, and let it dry for, a good 10 minutes before I ever die cut out or cut with scissors that image out. And then you're going to want to use a embossing gun or a heat gun. If you don't have one, I've heard that you can also do this in the oven. I've never done it, but I know there are other YouTube videos out there on how to shrink paper down using the oven. I actually like to shrink everything down in this old Amazon box because you're going to find that that paper prior to shrinking it down is it's very lightweight. It's going to want to fly around. So you're going to want to contain it or hold it down to a certain degree before you shrink it down, because if not, it's going to fly all over the place, and then it's going to start hardening in a shape or in a way that you don't want it to yet. So another thing is before you shrink it down, you're going to want to have that hole punched because you're not going to be able to punch any holes after it's shrunk down. It basically turns into really thick plastic once it's shrunk down. So make sure you punch those holes beforehand. And then again, if you don't have a box, or even if you do and you want to control that that piece of paper a little bit better, you can hold it down with a little stylus. Make sure it's metal. One thing I actually learned the hard way is I used a plastic one and it melted all over the place. So use a metal stylus, just kind of hold it down lightly, and then you're going to want to start heating it up. Once you see it start shrinking, then you're going to want to remove that stylus because you want to, again, try not to misshape or warp that paper in any way possible. And it's very finicky, so it will misshape pretty quick. So as soon as it's shrunk down, so you'll find that it curls up on itself and then starts to flatten back out. As soon as that happens, pull it out and flatten it as quick as you can, and then you will get a little charm. You can see here that I actually thought it was a little bit misshaped on the side, so I tried warming it back up to see if it would maybe flatten out a little bit better or be a little bit more symmetrical. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but it's still handmade and it's still super cute, so I was just going to go with it. So that is it for today. Let me know if you guys have any other questions and I'd be happy to help. Bye for now.